Imagine, standing outside the building you once owned, your reflection barely visible in the glass doors that no longer open for you. 9 years of 16-hour days, missed birthdays, unanswered calls, choosing boardrooms over family, all gone in 72 hours. What if everything you built vanished overnight? Would you still know who you are? The security guard inside wouldn't let her pass. And she realized, with a strange clarity, she didn't even know his name, though she'd walked past him every morning for 3 years. Her phone kept buzzing with calls from lawyers, investors, journalists, everyone except the one person whose call she was waiting for, her 19-year-old sister. You'd do anything to hear from the ones you love, wouldn't you? But what if they stopped waiting? At 35, in a designer coat that now felt worthless, with frozen fingers, she understood something she'd spent a decade running from. You can lose everything you built and still not hit bottom. Because the real fall happens when the people you love stop waiting for you to show up. The morning air cut through Rachel Morrison's coat as she stood on the corner of 5th and Madison, staring up at the steel and glass tower that used to bear her name. Carson Tez had been her baby, her obsession, her entire identity since she was 26. She'd built it from nothing, from a cramped studio apartment in Brooklyn, coding through the night, fueled by instant coffee and the desperate need to prove she could make it. By 32, she'd been on the cover of Forbes. By 34, she was running a company worth $200 million. By 35, she had nothing. The board meeting had lasted 47 minutes. Her business partner, the man she trusted since college, had presented fake evidence of financial fraud, invoices she'd never seen, transactions she'd never approved, emails with her signature that she'd never written. The vote was 7-2. Security had escorted her out while her assistant packed her personal items into a cardboard box. That was 3 days ago, and she still couldn't quite believe it was real. She kept expecting to wake up in her penthouse overlooking the Hudson, to realize it had all been some stress-induced nightmare. But the penthouse was gone, too. The bank had frozen her accounts within hours. Everything she owned was tied up in legal fights that her lawyer said could take years to resolve. Now she was staying in her college roommate's studio in Brooklyn, the same neighborhood where she'd started, sleeping on a pull-out couch that smelled faintly of cat litter. Her phone rang constantly, but never with the voice she wanted to hear. Her sister Sophie hadn't answered a single call. That text message last night was the first communication they'd had in 3 months, and it had landed like a punch to the gut. Rachel had always told herself she was working for her family, that the long hours and missed moments were investments in their future. But standing here in the cold, watching strangers walk in and out of her building without a second glance, she realized she'd been lying to herself all along. She'd missed Sophie's high school graduation because of a meeting in Tokyo, missed her first day of college because of a product launch, missed their grandmother's funeral last year because she was in London closing a deal. Every time Sophie had said she understood. Every time Rachel had believed her. But understanding wasn't the same as forgiving. And forgiveness wasn't the same as forgetting. The distance between them had grown so slowly that Rachel hadn't noticed until it was too late, until she was standing alone on a street corner with nothing but a borrowed coat and a phone full of calls from people who wanted something from her. Never for her. How far would you go to fix what you've broken? The doors of the building opened and a man in a Navy security uniform stepped out carrying a cardboard box. He was in his early 40s with graying hair at his temples and the kind of steady, unhurried movements that suggested he'd learned patience the hard way. She was gone. I felt like someone had reached inside my chest and pulled out my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but sit there and wonder how the hell I was supposed to keep going. Rachel looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. There was a steadiness in his eyes, a quiet strength that came from surviving something terrible and learning to live with the scars. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "Thank you?" He took a sip from his thermos. "The point is, I thought losing her was the worst thing that could happen to me. And it was terrible, don't get me wrong. But the real bottom came about 6 months later when I realized I'd lost myself, too. I'd been working at a financial firm, pulling 70-hour weeks, traveling constantly. I told myself I was building a future for my family, giving them the life they deserved. But what they actually needed was me, present, paying attention. And I'd been too busy climbing ladders to notice. He shifted on the cold steps, pulling his jacket tighter. After she died, I tried to keep going like before. Threw myself into work even harder. Like if I just stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel anything. My son, Ethan, he'd come home from school and I'd barely look up from my laptop. He'd asked me to help with homework, and I'd tell him I was in the middle of something important. One night, he brought me a drawing he'd made at school, a picture of our family. Except I wasn't in it. When I asked him why, he said, "Because you're never really here, Dad. Even when you're home." Rachel felt something twist in her stomach. She thought of Sophie's text message, the words she'd been trying not to think about. "You always said family came first, but you were never there when I needed you." It was the same thing, just phrased differently. The same accusation, the same truth she'd been running from. "What did you do?" she asked quietly. "I quit my job." Daniel said it simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Just walked in one Monday morning and told them I was done. Everyone thought I'd lost my mind, my friends, my colleagues, even my own parents. They said I was throwing away my career, that I was making a huge mistake. And maybe I was from a certain point of view. But I got a job as a night security guard, which meant I could be home during the day. Could take Ethan to school, help with homework, make him dinner, could actually be his father instead of just the guy who paid the bills, and that was enough." Rachel heard the doubt in her own voice. "You were okay giving up everything you'd worked for." "I didn't give up everything," Daniel met her eyes. "I gave up a title and a paycheck, but I got back something infinitely more valuable. I got my son back. I got to watch him grow up instead of hearing about it secondhand. I got to be there for his baseball games and his school plays and the night he had his first heartbreak and needed his dad." He paused. "Look, I'm not saying it was easy. There were plenty of nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made the right choice, if I should have tried to balance both somehow. But then I'd remember that drawing and I'd know. Because here's the thing nobody tells you about success. You can have everything the world says you're supposed to want, and still feel empty inside. And you can have almost nothing and feel rich beyond measure. It just depends on what you value." Rachel sat with his words, feeling them settle into the hollow spaces inside her. A woman in an expensive suit brushed past them, talking rapid fire into her phone about quarterly numbers and shareholder meetings. 6 months ago, that had been Rachel. 6 months from now, that woman might be sitting on these same steps, wondering where it all went wrong. The cycle just kept repeating. An endless parade of people chasing something they thought they wanted, only to discover too late that they'd been running in the wrong direction all along. Could one stranger's story change everything? "I need to call my sister," Rachel said suddenly. "But I don't know what to say to her." Start with the truth. Spent every one of them thinking about the last time she'd seen her grandmother. It had been 2 years ago at a family dinner. Rachel had shown up too late and left early, fielding calls from her office the entire time. Her grandmother had hugged her goodbye and said, "Don't work so hard that you forget to live, sweetheart." Rachel had laughed it off, kissed her cheek, and promised to visit soon. She never did. There was always another meeting, another deadline, another crisis that seemed more urgent than spending time with an old woman who'd already lived most of her life. Now hurrying through the hospital hallways, following signs to the cardiac unit, Rachel understood what her grandmother had been trying to tell her. Life didn't wait for you to get around to it. People didn't pause their needs until you had time to address them. Love required presence, not promises. And she'd spent so many years making promises she never kept that the people she loved had stopped believing her. She found Sophie in the waiting area, curled up in one of those uncomfortable plastic chairs that seemed to exist only in hospitals. Her sister looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw Rachel, something flickered in her expression. Surprise, maybe, or disbelief. Like she'd expected Rachel to call back with an excuse. Another reason why she couldn't make it. "You came," Sophie said, and there were tears in her voice. I came, Rachel confirmed, and sat down beside her. Not across from her, not keeping that careful distance she'd maintained for so long, but right beside her, close enough to take her hand. I'm here. Tell me what's happening. Sophie took a shaky breath and started talking. Their grandmother had felt chest pains the night before, had called an ambulance herself because Sophie was at school and Rachel was well. Rachel was never available. The doctor said it was a mild heart attack, that she'd need surgery. But the outlook was good. She was resting now, stable, but tired. They'd be able to see her in an hour once the morning tests were done. I was so scared, Sophie whispered. I kept thinking about Mom and Dad, about how fast we lost them. I couldn't lose Grandma, too. Not when I'm the only one left. Who? She trailed off, but Rachel understood. Not when I'm the only one left who cares. The unspoken accusation hung between them. I'm sorry, Rachel said. And this time, she let herself feel the full weight of it. You're not the only one who cares, Sophie. I care. I've always cared. I've just been really, really bad at showing it. She squeezed her sister's hand. But I want to change that. Not someday. Not when things calm down. Now, starting today. Sophie looked at her with those same eyes their mother had. Brown and deep and too knowing for 19. You've said that before? I know. And I broke that promise every time. But something happened today that made me realize I'd been living my life backwards. I thought success would make me happy. That if I just worked hard enough and achieved enough, everything else would fall into place. But it doesn't work like that. Daniel, the security guard at my old building, he told me something that hit me hard. He said you can have everything the world tells you to want and still feel empty inside. Who's Daniel? Sophie asked. And there was a hint of curiosity in her voice now, a small opening. So Rachel told her about standing outside the building, about breaking down on the steps, about Daniel's story of losing his wife and almost losing his son and choosing to walk away from everything to be present for what mattered. As she talked, she watched Sophie's expression soften slightly, the hard, defensive wall starting to lower just a fraction. He sounds like a good person, Sophie said when Rachel finished. He is. And he made me see that I've been a terrible sister. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't prioritize you. I let work consume everything. And I told myself it was for the right reasons. But really, it was just ego and fear and ambition all mixed up together. Rachel felt tears building again, but didn't try to stop them. When I got your text last night, it broke something open in me. Because you were right. I did say family came first. And then I proved over and over that it didn't. That my company came first, my reputation came first. My ambition came first. And now I've lost all of that. And you know what? The only thing I actually care about losing is you. Sophie was crying now, too. Silent tears tracking down her cheeks. I don't want to lose you either, she said, so quietly. Rachel almost didn't hear it. But I can't keep getting my hopes up just to have you disappoint me again. It hurts too much. I know. And I don't have any way to prove to you that this time is different except to show you. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Rachel pulled her phone from her pocket, and with Sophie watching, turned it completely off. Not on silent, not on vibrate, but off. No more calls from lawyers or investors or journalists. Not today. Today I'm here. Just here with you and Grandma. That's all that matters. They sat together in that waiting room for another 40 minutes, not talking much, just being present with each other in a way they hadn't been in years. Rachel told Sophie about the studio apartment she was staying in, about the cardboard box with her belongings, about the surreal feeling of having everything she'd built just vanish overnight. Sophie talked about school, about her classes and her friends, and a boy she liked but hadn't worked up the courage to talk to yet. Normal things, everyday things, the kind of conversations they should have been having all along. When the nurse finally came to tell them they could see their grandmother, they walked down the hallway hand in hand the way they used to when Sophie was small and Rachel was supposed to be looking after her. Their grandmother was awake, propped up on pillows, looking smaller and more fragile than Rachel remembered, but still with that sharp intelligence in her eyes. "Well," she said when she saw them both together, "this is a surprise. Both my girls at the same time. Must be worse than they told me." "Don't joke like that, Grandma," Sophie said. But she was smiling as she bent to kiss the old woman's cheek. "You scared me half to death." "Just a minor inconvenience," their grandmother said, patting Sophie's hand. Then her eyes moved to Rachel. And something complicated passed across her face. "Rachel, I heard about your company. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner," Rachel said, moving to the other side of the bed. "And I'm sorry I wasn't at your birthday last month or at Thanksgiving or at any of the dozens of times I should have been here and wasn't." She took her grandmother's free hand carefully, mindful of the four. "I've been a terrible granddaughter, but I want to do better if it's not too late." Her grandmother studied her for a long moment, and Rachel felt like she was being x-rayed. All her failures and regrets laid bare. Then the old woman smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "It's never too late, sweetheart. Not until we're dead, and I'm not quite there yet." She squeezed Rachel's hand with surprising strength. "You know, when you were little, before your parents died, you used to tell me you wanted to be just like your mother when you grew up. She was a teacher, remember? She didn't make much money, didn't have a fancy title or a corner office, but she was rich in all the ways that actually matter. She had time for her students, time for her family, time to sit in the park and feed the ducks. She knew what was important." Rachel remembered. The memories were faded, softened by time and grief. But they were there. Her mother grading papers at the kitchen table, laughing at something their father said. Her mother braiding Sophie's hair before school, patient and present. Her mother reading to them at bedtime, doing all the voices, making them giggle. She died when Rachel was 16 and Sophie was 6. A drunk driver running a red light on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Their father had followed 2 years later, a heart attack at 49. And just like that, they were orphans. Their grandmother had taken them in, raised them the rest of the way, and Rachel had spent the next decade trying to prove she could make something of herself, trying to prove she was worth the sacrifice. "I thought making a lot of money and being successful would honor them somehow," Rachel said quietly. "Like if I could just achieve enough, it would justify everything they missed out on." "Oh, honey." Their grandmother's voice was gentle. "The best way to honor your parents is to live well. And living well doesn't mean accumulating the most money or the biggest achievements. It means loving the people around you, being present for the moments that matter, finding joy in ordinary days. Your mother knew that. And now it's time for you to learn it too." They stayed until visiting hours ended, talking about small things and big things and everything in between. Their grandmother dozed off periodically, worn out from the medications. And during those quiet moments, Rachel and Sophie would look at each other and share small, tentative smiles. It felt like something was healing between them slowly and carefully, like a bone knitting itself back together after a break. When they finally left the hospital, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, neither quite ready to part ways yet. Sophie shifted her backpack and looked at Rachel uncertainly. "Do you want to get dinner? There's a place around the corner that does good pasta. Nothing fancy, but I'd love that," Rachel said, and meant it more than she'd meant anything in a long time. They walked together through the cooling evening air, and for the first time in 9 years, Rachel wasn't thinking about quarterly numbers or board meetings or market share. She was just thinking about her sister, and how much she'd missed her, and how grateful she was for the chance to try again. Over dinner, spaghetti carbonara in a tiny Italian place with red checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Sophie told her more about her life. She was majoring in environmental science, hoping to work in conservation. She'd broken up with her high school boyfriend last year, and was learning to be okay on her own. She volunteered at an animal shelter on weekends. She'd been thinking about studying abroad next semester, but wasn't sure she could afford it. "How much would you need?" Rachel asked, and Sophie immediately looked wary. "I'm not asking you for money. I know, but I'm asking you how much you need. Rachel set down her fork. Look, I don't have access to my accounts right now. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever get any of it back, but I have some savings from before I started the company. Money that wasn't tied up in everything else. It's not a fortune, but it's enough. If studying abroad is important to you, we'll make it happen. Sophie bit her lip, clearly torn between pride and hope. Are you sure? You're going to need that money for yourself, for lawyers and Sophie. Rachel reached across the table and took her sister's hand. I spent 9 years choosing money over you. I'm done with that. If I have to get a regular job and live in a studio apartment for the rest of my life, that's fine. But I'm not missing any more of your life because I'm too focused on my own problems. You want to study abroad? Then you should study abroad. That's what matters. They talked for 2 more hours until the restaurant staff started giving them pointed looks and they realized they were the last customers left. Outside, Sophie gave Rachel a hug that lasted a long time. And when they finally pulled apart, they were both crying a little. Thank you, Sophie whispered. For showing up today. For really showing up. Thank you for giving me another chance, Rachel said. I won't waste it. I promise. They parted ways at the subway station, and Rachel rode back to Brooklyn, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the forced calm she used to create with yoga classes and meditation apps, but real peace. The kind that came from making the right choice, from being aligned with her values for the first time in as long as she could remember. Back at the studio apartment, she turned her phone back on and watched as hundreds of notifications flooded in. Emails from lawyers, voicemails from journalists, text messages from former colleagues offering hollow sympathy or thinly veiled jabs. She scrolled through them all and then with a feeling of freedom deleted every single one. Then she pulled out the business card Daniel had given her and stared at the number he'd written on the back. It took her 3 tries to work up the courage to call, but when she finally did, he answered on the second ring. Daniel Cooper. Hi, it's Rachel from this morning. I just wanted to say thank you again for everything you said. It made a difference. I went to see my sister and my grandmother, and it was good. Really good. I'm glad she could hear the smile in his voice. That took courage. It shouldn't have. Showing up for family should be the easiest thing in the world. But I made it complicated. She paused. You were right about what you said about how you can have everything and still feel empty. I was empty for so long and I didn't even realize it because I was too busy running. So, what are you going to do now? Daniel asked. I don't know yet. Figure out who I am without the company, I guess. Be a better sister and granddaughter. Find a way to live that. Actually feels like living instead of just surviving. She laughed, surprised at how foreign the sound was. That probably sounds naive. It sounds honest, Daniel said. And honesty is a good place to start. There was a pause and she heard voices in the background. Look, I'm just getting Ethan ready for bed, but would you want to get coffee sometime? I meant what I said about having someone to talk to. Starting over is hard. Sometimes it helps to do it with someone who understands. I'd like that, Rachel said. I'd really like that. They made plans to meet at a coffee shop near the hospital the following week after Rachel had a chance to visit her grandmother again and spend more time with Sophie. After they hung up, Rachel sat in the dim apartment and thought about the strange path her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been on top of the world. Now she had nothing but a borrowed couch and a growing list of legal problems. And yet somehow she felt lighter than she had in years. Over the next few weeks, Rachel built a new routine. She visited her grandmother every day, sitting by her bedside and telling her stories about the legal battles and the slow process of rebuilding her reputation. She had dinner with Sophie twice a week, sometimes just the 2 of them, sometimes with their grandmother when she was feeling strong enough. She met Daniel for coffee and through him met his son Ethan, a 13-year-old with his father's steady eyes and a passion for marine biology. She started to build a life that wasn't centered around work, around achievement, around proving her worth to people who'd never really valued her anyway. Her lawyer called with updates about the case. It turned out her business partner had been stealing for years, carefully setting up Rachel to take the fall. There was a chance, a small one, that they could prove her innocence, but it would take time and money and energy. And Rachel found that she didn't care as much as she thought she would. The company felt like something from another lifetime, something that had belonged to a different person entirely. One afternoon, about a month after everything fell apart, Rachel was sitting in the hospital cafeteria with Daniel, while Sophie stayed upstairs with their grandmother. They'd fallen into an easy friendship, meeting a few times a week to talk about life and loss and the strange journey of starting over. Ethan was at the table with them, working on a biology project, occasionally asking Rachel questions about research methods and data analysis. "You'd make a good teacher," Daniel observed, watching her explain something to his son. "You're patient with him in a way most adults aren't." Rachel considered that my mother was a teacher. "I always thought I'd follow a different path, something more prestigious." "But maybe prestigious isn't the same as meaningful." "It's definitely not," Daniel agreed. "Some of the most meaningful work in the world is done by people nobody ever hears about. People just showing up every day, taking care of what needs taken care of, being present for the people who need them." He took a sip of his terrible cafeteria coffee. "Speaking of which, how's your grandmother doing?" "Better. They're talking about discharging her next week if she continues to improve. She'll need someone to stay with her for a while, help with medications and follow-up appointments." Rachel smiled. "I volunteered. What about your legal case? I thought you had depositions coming up." "I do, but I can handle both. My lawyer can work around my schedule instead of the other way around. That's the advantage of not having a company to run anymore. My time is actually my own." She watched Ethan carefully sketching the structure of a cell, his tongue poking out slightly in concentration. "Daniel, can I ask you something? Do you ever miss it? The life you had before?" He thought about it for a long moment. "Sometimes I miss the intellectual challenge of it, the complexity of the work. But then I come home to Ethan, and we make dinner together, and he tells me about his day and I remember what I was missing before. I was so focused on building something big that I forgot to appreciate the small things that actually make life worth living." He met her eyes. "You're going to be okay, Rachel. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but you are. You made the hardest choice, choosing your sister over your career. Everything else is just details." "It was because of you," Rachel said. "What you told me that morning about your son's drawing, about realizing you weren't present even when you were home, that stayed with me. It made me see myself clearly for the first time in years, and I didn't like what I saw." "You saw yourself clearly because you were ready to," Daniel corrected gently. "I just happened to be there at the right moment. But the choice was yours. And so is everything that comes next." He glanced at his watch. "I should get Ethan home. He's got school tomorrow, and if I let him stay up late working on this project, he'll be exhausted." He ruffled his son's hair affectionately. "Come on, buddy. Pack it up." Ethan gathered his materials, thanked Rachel for her help, and the three of them walked out together. At the hospital entrance, Daniel paused. "Same time next week." "Same time," Rachel confirmed. She watched them walk toward the parking lot, Daniel's hand resting on Ethan's shoulder, the two of them talking about something that made Ethan laugh. It was such a simple scene, a father and son on an ordinary evening. But there was something profound in its ordinariness. This was what mattered. This was what she'd been missing. She took the elevator back up to her grandmother's floor and found Sophie reading to her from a mystery novel their grandmother loved. Rachel slipped into the room quietly and sat in the other chair, listening to her sister's voice rise and fall with the rhythm of the story. Her grandmother's eyes were closed, but she was smiling slightly, one hand resting on Sophie's arm. When Sophie finished the chapter, she looked up and saw Rachel watching them. "How long have you been there?" she asked. "A few minutes." I didn't want to interrupt. Rachel leaned forward. "You're really good at that, you know, reading aloud. You do all the voices." "Mom used to do that," Sophie said softly. "I barely remember her, but I remember that. The way she'd make every character sound different." Their grandmother opened her eyes. You both have so much of her in you. Not just in how you look, though you do, but in your hearts. You have her kindness, her strength. She looked at Rachel. You were lost for a while, sweetheart, but you're finding your way back. That takes courage. I'm trying, Rachel said. I don't have it all figured out yet, but I'm trying. That's all any of us can do, her grandmother said. Try and keep trying and forgive ourselves when we stumble. Life isn't about getting it perfect. It's about showing up and doing the best you can with what you have. They stayed until the nurse came to check vital signs and gently suggested it was time for the patient to rest. Out in the hallway, Sophie linked her arm through Rachel's. Want to come to my dorm? My roommate's gone for the weekend and I could use the company. We could watch a movie or something. I'd love that, Rachel said, and felt that now familiar warmth spreading through her chest. Not the sharp thrill of closing a deal or seeing her company's stock price rise, but something gentler and more lasting. The simple joy of being wanted, of being chosen, of matching to someone for who she was rather than what she could do for them. They took the subway to Sophie's campus, talking about nothing important and everything important, the way sisters do when they're finally learning to be sisters again. In Sophie's small dorm room, surrounded by textbooks and posters, and the organized chaos of a college student's life, Rachel felt more at home than she ever had in her penthouse apartment. They ordered pizza, watched a movie either of them had seen before, and fell asleep on Sophie's narrow bed sometime after midnight, curled up together like they used to when Sophie was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Rachel woke up as dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the thin curtains. Sophie was still asleep beside her, snoring softly. Rachel carefully extracted herself, and went to stand by the window looking out over the campus. Students were already up jogging or heading to early classes, living their lives with the casual confidence of people who still believed they could do anything. She'd been like that once before ambition hardened into obsession. Before success became an addiction she couldn't quit. Her phone buzzed with a text from her lawyer. They'd found more evidence, a paper trail that clearly showed her business partner's fraud. There was a good chance they could not only clear her name, but possibly recover some of her assets. It should have felt like victory, like justice. Instead, Rachel just felt tired. She texted back asking the lawyer to send her the details later and put her phone away. Sophie stirred and blinked awake, disoriented for a moment before focusing on Rachel. Morning, she mumbled. What time is it? Early. Go back to sleep. But Sophie sat up, rubbing her eyes. Are you okay? You look like you're thinking about something heavy. My lawyer says we might win the case, Rachel said. I might get some of my money back. Maybe even the company. That's good, right? Sophie was watching her carefully, trying to read her expression. I don't know, Rachel admitted. A month ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, I'm not sure I want it back. The company, I mean, or even the money if it comes with all the strings attached, the pressure, the constant demands. The way it consumed every hour of every day. She turned from the window. I've been happier these last few weeks with almost nothing than I was for years when I had everything. Sophie considered this. So don't take it back. Let them keep the company. Start something new, something smaller that you can actually manage without losing yourself. Is it that simple? Why can't it be? Sophie stood and stretched. You're the one who always told me that being successful meant being brave enough to take risks. Well, maybe the biggest risk is walking away from what everyone thinks you should want and choosing what actually makes you happy. She grabbed her toothbrush from the desk. I'm going to brush my teeth and then I'm making us breakfast. We're out of almost everything, so it's going to be toast and questionable jam, but it'll be food. She paused in the doorway. For what it's worth, I like this version of you better. The one who sleeps in dorm rooms and doesn't check her phone every 5 minutes. You seem more real. After she left, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed and thought about what Sophie had said. More real. She'd spent so long crafting a public image, being the person she thought a successful CEO should be, that she'd forgotten how to just be herself. Or maybe she'd never known. She'd gone straight from orphan teenager to workaholic young adult, driven by grief and fear and the desperate need to matter. She'd equated mattering with achieving and achieving with accumulating. And somewhere along the way, she'd lost sight of the fact that she already mattered simply by virtue of being alive and loved. The next few months passed in a strange limbo of legal proceedings and personal rebuilding. Rachel's lawyer worked tirelessly on the case, and slowly the truth emerged. Her business partner had been running an elaborate fraud scheme, siphoning money through shell companies and falsifying documents. When it became clear he was about to be discovered, he'd framed Rachel to buy himself time to escape. By the time the authorities figured it out, he'd fled to a country without an extradition treaty. Rachel's name was cleared, her reputation restored. The board apologized, offered her the CEO position back. She turned them down. Instead, she took a job as a consultant for small businesses, helping startups navigate the challenges she'd once faced. The work paid a fraction of what she'd made before, but it was satisfying in a way corporate leadership had never been. She could see the direct impact of her advice, could build relationships with founders who reminded her of herself at 26, full of hope and hunger, and naive belief that they could change the world. She worked reasonable hours, had time for dinners with Sophie and visits with her grandmother, who recovered slowly but steadily. She and Daniel continued to meet for coffee, and gradually, carefully, their friendship deepened into something more. Neither of them rushed it. They'd both learned the hard way that the best things in life couldn't be forced or scheduled. They happened in their own time, in quiet moments, over terrible coffee, and conversations that meandered from deep to silly, and back again. Ethan took to calling Rachel his bonus aunt, which made her laugh and also made her heart ache in a good way. She never thought much about having a family of her own. Had always assumed she'd figure that out later after she'd achieved her professional goals, but later kept getting pushed back until suddenly she was 35 and alone. Now approaching 36, she had something that felt more valuable than all the success she'd once craved. She had people who knew her, really knew her, and loved her anyway. She had a sister who called her just to talk, a grandmother who asked for her opinion on books and politics and life. A friend who understood what it meant to lose everything and choose to build something different from the ashes. She had a life that was smaller and quieter and infinitely richer than anything she'd had before. One evening, almost 6 months after that morning, on the steps of her old building, Rachel stood in the same spot where she'd first met Daniel. The building looked the same, still gleaming and impressive, still bearing the name of the company she'd founded, but she felt completely different. The glass doors opened and Daniel came out, having just finished his shift. When he saw her, his whole face lit up in a way that made her chest feel warm. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, coming to stand beside her. "Feeling nostalgic?" "Not exactly." Rachel looked up at the building one last time. "I was just thinking about how 6 months ago I thought losing all this was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, but really I'd been losing what mattered for years, and I just didn't see it until everything else got stripped away." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become comfortable and familiar. "Regrets, none, and she meant it. You changed my life that morning, you know, in seconds. Like the saying goes, one conversation, one story, and suddenly I could see everything differently." "I didn't change anything," Daniel said, echoing what he'd told her before. "You did all the hard work. I just happened to be there when you needed someone to listen." "Well, I'm glad you were there." Rachel leaned into him slightly. "And I'm glad you're here now." They stood together as the sun set behind the buildings, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose around them. The city hummed with its usual chaos, people rushing home from work, street vendors calling out their wares, the endless symphony of horns and voices and footsteps. But inside the small bubble of space they occupied, there was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you're exactly where you're supposed to be with exactly who you're supposed to be with. "Come on," Daniel said eventually. "Sophie's expecting us for dinner, and you know how she gets if we're late." "She gets it from our grandmother," Rachel said. But she was smiling as they walked away from the building, away from the past, toward whatever came next. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't have a 5-year plan or quarterly numbers or any of the road maps that used to guide her life. But she had something better. She had people she loved and who loved her back. She had days that felt meaningful instead of just productive. She had time, real time, not the stolen scraps between meetings to sit and talk and simply be present. And in the end, that was the greatest success of all. Not the money or the recognition or the corner office. Just this. Walking through a city at dusk with someone who knew your worst mistakes and chose to stay anyway. Heading toward a dinner table where your family waited. Living a life that was messy and imperfect, and absolutely beautifully.